the Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
All right, today I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Dixon, and he would probably call himself a local historian.
I think that's probably it. Yeah, historian, sociologist, that kind of thing.
All that.
Yep.
Kevin, why don't you tell us where it is we're standing right now?
Right. Isn't it this remarkable building?
It is quite remarkable.
It's wonderful, brilliantly illuminated, and it's immensely old. And we're actually in the centre of Torquay, fairly close to the sort of the coastline. It's part of the remarkable estate of Torre Abbey, which is a pre-Monstratensian abbey dating from 1196. This is probably a little bit later. It's an immense space, a huge barn, and it's been here for 1,000 years, and it's got a great history to it.
Well, tell me some of this history,
Right.
because you look around and you see all this old stone, and you can just tell so much has happened here. So,
oh yes, I mean so much has happened.
Yeah.
Probably the most interesting, one of the most important things. I mean, it's very much a working space, as you can probably see. One of the interesting historical facts, and the reason why it's called the Spanish Barn, is in 1588. If you go back to your history, you know that the Spanish Armada attempted to invade England. They got halfway up the English Channel, and they were attacked by the English fleet. The English fleet captured a ship called the Rosario and brought 397 captured Spanish sailors and incarcerated them in this space.
in this space,
It actually locked them up in this space. And then from then on, they're only here for a couple of weeks. Obviously, they're really expensive to actually look after. And they're also quite valuable. It's only later that we started getting these kind of legends about them all being murdered and things, and they weren't. So they were ransomed. Most of them made it back to Spain. The senior officers sent off to London, paid a big ransom, went back off to Spain, and about 15 of them died between the battle and by the time they were repatriated.
Okay.
But 15 out of 397, and they had been in a sea battle, so we don't know what did for them, but it was something like that. But it's only after then that the sort of real legends and things that actually developed from on this site.
Do we have any idea what it would have looked like with that many men in here? Like, was it like this with just men lying about? Or?
Yes, probably. That's it. Straw on the floor. I mean, obviously, it's a sort of different floor. Things like that. Very dark. I mean, if you can see not much light coming in, so it's quite a miserable space. And the locals didn't like it. I mean, because there was a big, as you know from your Tudor history, the sort of disconnect between sort of Catholic invaders and Anglican sort of local Protestants that were here. So the sort of local villagers came in, and they were outside the gate saying, what are we looking after these people for? And so we didn't want them. They're expensive. We wanted to get them away, and they were shipped out after a week or two. So they weren't here for that long.
Oh, you mentioned that there's some interesting stories about this place.
Yes, and I think it's the thing with local history, and I'm really interested in that kind of the way that people fill in vacuums. And there's loads of sort of ghost stories and legends, some of which do go back, hundreds of years. Many of them, and I think this is right the way to the whole of the country, but specifically in somewhere like Torquay, which used to be the richest town in England. So it's almost like the local tourist industry generated lots of sort of ghost stories and legends and things like that. And then when you find little bits of other evidence, things like this, big cannonballs being found in the grounds of Torre Abbey. So that immediately says, there was a big battle here, and there probably wasn't. We do know it was attacked from the sea, 4 or 5 times by the French and the Dutch. But a lot of these kind of stories, just people fill in gaps in their memory, and ghost stories are really exciting.
What's your favorite story?
Oh, that this one isn't true, right? But it was. And I think it just shows when you sort of look at culture and heritage there, and it goes back to that 1588, and it's a complete fabrication. But the story was that when the Spanish invaders came in, that they disguised a young woman, whether it was somebody's daughter or fiance or wife, as a cabin boy, because they were so convinced they were going to invade England that they were going to be there first to grab the land. And the legend was that she died actually in here through disease. And ever since then, she's been wandering up and down in her fine Spanish mantilla outfit and sort of haunting the place. Now, it brings into one of the questions about how did she then go from being dressed as a cabin boy to, unless heaven's got a dressing up box, but it's a bit of a legend, this one.
Yes.
And like so many of these things, it was made up hundreds of years later.
Yeah.
So, and the Victorians, but it's interesting because it looks at that kind of early Victorian Gothic tradition, that every castle has to have a ghost and a walled up somebody in the dungeons, and
You know, the
That kind of
Victorians
things.
really had a way of telling stories about history, didn't they?
And there's a checklist of things, that you can go, it's got to be, a woman done wrong, incest,
Love,
murder,
yeah.
somebody walled up somewhere, burials, revenge, and it's all that Gothic stuff. So
Those
great fun.
Victorians really knew how to spicing up history even more than it already was. I mean, the history itself is amazing, but the Victorians took it to a whole new level.
Oh, absolutely, and they just base things on books. And I always say, if see what literature around at the time and see whether a ghost story is based on that, and particularly as Torquay was such a, it was the elite tourist resort for the entire empire, entire British Empire. So more members of European royal families could be seen in Torquay than anywhere else in the world. So it's the richest town in England. So you had all of these people doing guided tours, and I think a lot of it comes from that. So they'd be queuing up in their carriages, and the more exciting your tour was, the bigger the tip you got. So you had more interest in actually sort of making up and embroidering a few stories. But you don't need to. I mean, look at this building. It's remarkable, isn't it?
This is absolutely remarkable. I do want to come back to the Spanish men that were held here, because I'm really having a hard time wrapping my brain around the fact that there were that many men here. How is that even possible?
Well, there's been some investigation work. One of the wonderful volunteers from the Abbey actually did a plan, and there would not have been enough space for everybody to lie down here at the same time. So they must have stacked themselves and things like that.
Laying on top of each
396 men and 1 woman. I'm just kidding. So they wouldn't have had the space. And while we've been standing here, you might have heard some sounds outside.
Yes.
There's looking at the investment in this entire site. So there's a £2 million investment and sort of renovation program going on. So the beeping sounds are things reversing and moving around. And it's so important that we invest and we sort of look at our sort of our really immensely historic and absolutely valuable buildings. So it's and more people are going to come and sort of experience this.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely have to come and experience this. Dr. Kevin Dixon, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, I am outside the Spanish barn with Kevin again. Kevin, let's talk about the location of this barn.
I think the location sort of dictates the sort of architecture and the defensive nature of this site, and it's really unusual because when you think about abbeys and you think about monasteries, you think about somewhere really peaceful and monks just slowly sort of wandering up and down and doing all this. This was a defensive space, and we've got a defensive tower here, a defensive gatehouse. And it's got sort of gun slits and it's got arrow slits. And we think there was 3 of them. There's another one that was a little bit further that way. Probably one over there. We're probably looking at a sort of walled space. And the reason why it was defensive is because it's coastal. So if we look over here, just imagine this has been flattened. This would have been marshland. And there's a little causeway that comes up here. And you're right next to the coast. You're actually on Torre Bay. So we know that the bay, the English Channel is infested by pirates, by French ships, by Dutch ships, Spanish ships. And so if you think about almost like a freeway or a motorway, so they'd be coming up and down here, you needed to look as though you could defend yourself. And that's why this was here. And I think that for about 300 or 400 years, it was this building, even when it was derelict, it was actually dissuading pirates and raiders and foreign sea powers from actually attacking and coming into Torre Bay. And I think that's why it's so important. And that's a legacy of those pre-Monstransian peaceful cannons.
Thank you, Kevin. Now here I am at Torre Abbey with Torre Abbey manager Lucinda. Lucinda, welcome.
Hello, thank you for coming.
Can you tell me about the history of this place? Let's start from the beginning and work our way through, shall we?
Okay, so the Abbey's been here for over 800 years. It was founded in 1196 by a small group of men who arrived by the sea, because it was the only way to arrive. And they were canons, not monks, which means they're also ordained priests. They were given the land by a chap called William Brewer, who was a friend of the king at the time. His son, William Brewer the Younger, was ransomed with Richard I. So that's the sort of actual people they were working with. And he gave the land to the canons with the idea being, the history at that time, that you could buy your way through purgatory.
Yes.
So the idea of purgatory, that the place you end up for your sins before you get to heaven, and a lot of wealthy people gave money or gave land and had chantries sang to help them through purgatory to atone for their sins quicker. So that's why the land was given by William Brewer to the canons. And they're pre-Monstransian canons. They took their name from Premontre in France. the chaps who came here were an order that was in the north of England, but they were also known as the Norbertines. They were white canons, they wore white robes, very strange
Oh,
idea
yeah.
in medieval
Yeah.
times. Why would you wear white? But
Yeah.
they did. And they came and they arrived, and I'm sure they thought, gosh, where on earth have we got to? There really wasn't anything here when they arrived. There's a tiny little chapel up on the hill behind us and a few fishing huts around the harbour, but you wouldn't have been able to get to those. There was no road
Oh, okay.
access, only by the sea. And they arrived and they founded the abbey here. And behind us over here, you can see the church. And the ruins that we're standing in front of are all the main buildings that would have supported the abbey's purpose. So the chapter house, the sacristy, the monument room. So all the really religious rooms, if you like. And then the south range was where all the domestic dwellings were. And then the east range over there was the abbot's quarters, the chap that ran the place.
Okay.
And the kitchens further on. And obviously, you've seen the Spanish barn.
Yeah.
And so they really put Torquay on the map, and we're here now still doing hospitality 800 years later because of
Yes.
them. And by the time of the Dissolution, they were the wealthiest Premonstratensian abbey in the country. Not the biggest, but the wealthiest. So that's why Henry VIII's commissioners wanted to get his hands on everything that was here.
It was a target, a big,
absolute
big
targets,
target.
yeah. And there were only about 6 canons living here by then, so they were all retired and given a good pension. So none of our canons ended up on the street, which obviously did happen to a lot of people living in religious orders at the time of the Dissolution. But what the commissioners were absolutely needed to do was decommission the areas that could be used for religious purposes to ensure that they couldn't be used for that in the future.
Yeah.
So the church would have been completely stripped, and all of these rooms would have been completely stripped. But the domestic arrangements they weren't so bothered about, which is why they survived and have now got the Georgian mansion as we see it, hugging the medieval buildings. The medieval, they're all still there. So that's all still there.
What did this abbey provide for the community around it?
They would have provided everything, basically. As I say, they were ordained priests, so the church was an open church. They would have held services here. They married people, buried people, all of those things. They had an infirmary, so they survived all the health care as well. They did any education. You could also knock on their door any time of the day or night and be taken in. So they were big on their hospitality. They needed to provide that. So you can imagine at the time of the Dissolution, once all of that went, it would have been such a huge change for the area.
Yeah, they would have helped feed the poor too, right?
Absolutely.
I can't imagine what a great change that was when they came in and dissolved this abbey for the community around.
Yeah.
You know, we understand why Henry VIII did it, but it does seem so selfish now, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think sometimes, you get caught up in those stories of Henry VIII and his wives and the Reformation and everything else, but you forget the normal people, the common people, if you like, and the impact that it would have had right across the country, not having these amazing religious orders to support them, provide work, actually.
Right.
They did help communities together. They were the biggest landowners. They were one of the biggest landowners in Devon, our canons here. They founded Newton Abbot, new town of the Abbots. So, they were very, very influential.
I can't help but reach out and touch buildings like this because there's just so much history here.
And you feel part of it, I think, when you get in contact with the building.
Yes. Because you wonder who else touched this.
Yes.
Who walked by this.
Yes.
That's the beauty of England to me, is everywhere you look, there's history. But especially a place like this, because in its ruins now, that you really want to be able to imagine what it used to be like here.
Well, what you're standing in now is the original cloister. So it would have been a 4-sided cloister. Obviously, the south range has now become a house. But the markers that you can see in the ground here are all graves.
Oh, wow.
So there's over 40 graves and through this cloister area. And we don't know who they are individually, but we know they were probably the canons themselves to be buried somewhere like the cloister. Because the idea being that your brothers would be walking over you every day and remembering you. And we still do that now.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Lucinda, for anybody who wants to come visit here, is there anything you'd like to tell them?
We're open 6 days a week, so please do come. We're open all year round. We shut for a couple of weeks in January, but we're open Monday through till Sunday, 10 till 5. And we have a great offer, not just we've got the medieval, but right the way we've got 800 years of history here. And I think and beautiful gardens. There's something for everybody here at the Abbey. And I think the other really interesting thing with the Abbey is, much like we're talking about the Dissolution, but you can pick up those really key moments in the national history here, like the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon was brought into the bay and held as a prisoner, but also Earl St. Vincent, who was the leader of the fleet, had his quarterdeck in the Abbey. He was based here. So you can go right through our history and pick up
layers of it.
Yes.
Just layer upon layer.
800 years.
I love it. Lucinda, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with me today.
That's okay. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. If you love the show and would like to show your support, please head on over to my Patreon page. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty for more information. Over there, you're going to find commercial-free episodes. You'll get early access, and there's some exclusive content as well, with more stuff to come as I'm rebuilding it. Also, recently I returned from England and cannot wait to go back. But this time I would love to bring you with me. So if you're interested to go on a tour of England with me, why don't you send me an email, Rebecca@tudorsdynasty.com, for more information. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.